What's it like to have a father who's working in weapons technology, Um, well, first of all, the thing is that the only reason I know a bit about it is because I moved into this area myself and was given access to some of the work that he actually performed. Other than that, I wouldn't have had a clue what he did in his working life because he was sworn to oaths of secrecy and he was very good at keeping secrets. He was the consummate Cold War warrior, was my father. Um, so much so, for example, that he was involved in a plane crash which killed the flight crew, and him and an engineer walked away from it, and the engines of that aircraft were buried 30 feet deep in the jungle. That's how much of a crash it was, and he survived that. And he came home 3 weeks later and told us that the plane had um, an engine breakdown. They waited 3 weeks to get parts. He didn't mention the fact that it had crashed, been completely destroyed, and the crew were dead. I only found that out many, many years later when I saw the engine of the aircraft in a museum in Woomera Rocket Range with the plaque out there on the date and everything, and I knew immediately it was the aircraft he was in. So he was that secretive. Now, other things that he kept secret were the fact that he was actually exposed to radiation during a nuclear weapons test, and it affected his health. He developed all sorts of conditions from it. Initially, a thing called ulcerative colitis because the radioactive dust particles went through his gut, and he had permanent ulceration right through his bowel, right through his working life from that point on. And he just started drinking. That's all I remember. He never said a bloody word about it. When he had to go in hospital a couple of times, he'd say it was for a heart condition, and so we believed it because how are you supposed to know? But it was the military were treating him for radiation effects, and yet he never said a word, not a word. So that's what it's like to have a dad who's in the secret world. Now, if you're thinking of going into a military career, you're going to have a fantastic life. You work on the leading edge of technology in very exciting projects with unlimited funding pretty well. But just bear in mind that you've got this other side of it where you actually can't tell anybody about it. Now, because I was his son and I've got three brothers who are in a similar situation, we were in a town where there was a very large weapons development facility, government thing. So there were the children of scientists and engineers who were performing well for the government, and they would watch the children of these people, including me, and follow our school career. And they started changing the school curriculum for those of us who were in this particular group, the children of scientists and engineers working in these very technical areas of nuclear weapons and so on, looking for future talent, you see, which is a sort of natural and logical thing to do when you think about it. So I remember before I left primary school, that's around about 7 or 8 years of age, I think I was. It would have been a bit older. About 8 to 10 years of age. It's all a bit hazy now. We started doing computer programming. So where other kids were still doing, basic mathematics, adding stuff up and perhaps starting to do a bit of algebra and so on, we were starting to do computer programming even at that stage. By the time I got to high school, we started doing advanced physics. Now, I found that the physics curriculum that we had was different to everybody else's. In fact, we were doing experimental research for the military into magnetic fields, the Earth's magnetic field, basically. And our task was, as a group of students, there was 8 of us in a select crew put in this class. We had a lecturer who came along, who we later discovered was actually an Air Force colonel. Very, very nice man, very knowledgeable, remarkably well-disciplined for a teacher, I'd have to say. Even in those days when teachers were stricter than they are now, he was probably a cut above that. But I was used to that. My father was like that, of course. So we were doing stuff like measuring the magnetic field of the Earth over the school and eventually over the whole of a section of the town, determining what happened when trees interrupted the magnetic field of the Earth, and metal and stone buildings and so on, investigating how all these different kinds of materials and shapes affected the magnetic field. And then later on we moved into developing more sensitive instruments to detect this. And then we started to do some work on remote sensing of the magnetic field, which is probably being used in military aircraft and other craft to this day, probably in satellites, I'd imagine. I know it's being used in the mining industry. Now, this interest in field technology seemed to be great for the military, and in third year high school, the next year on, we got an even more advanced physics curriculum where we would start studying gravitational fields. Now, this requires extremely sensitive instruments which sort of turned up out of the blue and obviously will be on the funding of any state government school. And with this, we began to study stuff like Einstein's theories on time and so on, because if you're aware of what Einstein and other scientists came up with, they were able to show that gravity alters time. For this reason, time exists in fields the same as gravity exists in fields. And this is a whole new area of interest and research because it gives you a very distinctive remote sensing technology. And we started to get involved in that. In high school, I was in a ordinary state school. It wasn't a private school, it was just an ordinary school. And we started to do that stuff, and we hadn't even joined the military at that stage. That didn't happen till later, So that's how the military does stuff. So I'll tell you about that because I did it in a public school, and it was actually part of the school curriculum, so I don't see how that could ever be classified, But I know that later that particular bit of research that we did, because it was fresh new ideas from a group of young school guys and girls. There were a number of girls in that group too, very bright. Rebecca, I remember her, very, very, very bright girl. I wonder what happened to her. Working for a government somewhere, I don't doubt. There are a group of aircraft called the Orion, which is an American-designed aircraft, a long-range surveillance aircraft, and they are capable of detecting submarines below the ocean at any depth from 10,000 metres in the air. And they carry weapon systems like torpedoes can be dropped on parachutes and so on that can destroy a submarine. And they patrol the Indian Ocean. In fact, Australia patrols the entire Indian Ocean and detects with great accuracy nuclear submarines on a regular basis for our allies and ourselves. And we have the capability of destroying these craft if we need to. So that's where research like that can lead. Is that ethical? Yeah, we're defending our country. It's part of it. It's a deterrent to your enemies. And if you don't do this technology, they certainly are doing it. So it keeps the balance there. Is it fun to do? Yeah, it is. It's great fun, I mean, you can argue the morality of it, but it was bloody great fun to be in high school and get involved in that, Initially, I didn't move into the military when I left school. I actually started working with IBM because of the advanced schooling we'd had in programming, military research. I can tell you these few things that happened. I can't tell you anything about my father's career, which I've become a bit more knowledgeable about, or my own career. And if you move into this field of work, you'll be the same. But it's great fun, and you get some really good mates and very eccentric people you meet in this endeavour. And I'd recommend it as a career. But you have to have the right mindset. You have to be dedicated to the defence of your country. You have to be satisfied with the fact that you'll probably never be able to tell anybody some of the amazing things that you'll do in your life. Okay? Think about it. See ya.